Welcome to my YouTube channel, Secret Affairs Exposed. This is where we uncover the hidden and shocking stories of secret love affairs that were never meant to come to light. Now, let's dive into today's topic. My daughter-in-law gifted me a cruise with her and my son during the fancy dinner while she kept my son distracted on the dance floor. A waitress handed me a note that said, "I just saw her put something into your drink." I switched our glasses and watched my daughter-in-law drug herself instead of me. 20 minutes later, she was babbling nonsense while my son stared at her in horror, asking if she needed a doctor. That's when I realized I'd been living with a predator for months, and she'd been slowly destroying my mind one sip at a time. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from, because this story gets way darker than you think, and I guarantee you haven't heard anything like it before. But let me back up and tell you how I got to that moment, because honestly, I should have seen it coming from day one. The signs were all there, painted in red flags that I mistook for welcome mats. When my son Elliot called on a Tuesday evening, his voice had that excited edge I hadn't heard in years. "Mom, I want you to meet someone special. Are you free for dinner this weekend?" My heart did a little skip. Not because of romance. Lord knows I'd given up on finding love again after losing Richard, but because it had been so long since Elliot sounded genuinely happy. Success had made him distant. His tech company consumed 18-hour days, and our weekly dinners had gradually become monthly phone calls, then holiday visits with awkward hugs. Saturday night arrived, and I spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing the right outfit. Nothing too fancy. Didn't want to seem like I was trying too hard, but nice enough to make a good first impression. The restaurant was one of those upscale places downtown with white tablecloths and waiters who whisper. When Elliot walked in holding hands with this stunning blonde, I understood immediately why he'd been so distracted lately. She was the kind of beautiful that makes other women check their lipstick. Tall, elegant, with perfectly styled hair that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Mom, this is Ava," he said, and his face was glowing in a way I hadn't seen since he was 12 and got his first bicycle. "Mrs. Bennett, I've heard so much about you," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Her smile seemed genuine, warm, and her grip was firm without being aggressive. "Elliot talks about you constantly. He's told me all about your charity work and how you practically built half the library's children's section." Really? Because he barely called me these days. But sure, let's go with that narrative. During dinner, Ava hung on my every word like I was dispensing wisdom from Mount C. She complimented my vintage Chanel earrings. "They're absolutely timeless. Where did you find them?" Asked thoughtful questions about Richard's engineering career, and even wanted to know about my volunteer work at the animal shelter. When I mentioned how quiet the house had gotten since Richard passed, how I sometimes went days without real conversation, she practically gasped with sympathy. "Oh, Rose, may I call you Rose? You shouldn't be alone so much. That's heartbreaking." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "Elliot, didn't you mention that cruise we booked for next month? The one to the Caribbean?" Elliot looked genuinely surprised, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "Well, yes, but I thought we'd discussed keeping it just the two of us. Rose should come with us." Ava's enthusiasm seemed to bubble over naturally. "It'll be perfect. Just the three of us bonding. I'd absolutely love to get to know my future mother." "Better please say yes, Rose. It would mean the world to me." Future mother and all. The words hit me right in the chest in that empty space that had been aching since Richard died. Someone wanted me around. Someone was planning a future that included me. I said yes before Elliot could raise any objections. And honestly, I would have said yes to a trip to Antarctica if it meant feeling wanted again. Over the next few weeks, Ava and I became practically inseparable, and I started feeling like I had a daughter for the first time in my life. Shopping trips where she'd actually ask my opinion on dresses. Coffee dates where she'd listen to me ramble about Richard's terrible jokes and his obsession with fixing things that weren't broken. Long lunches where she'd encourage me to order dessert and tell me stories about her teaching job that made me laugh until my cheeks hurt. She was everything I'd hoped for in a daughter-in-law, attentive without being clingy, sweet without being saccharine, genuinely interested in my life, without seeming like she was interviewing me for something, or so I thought. God, I was such a fool. During one of our shopping excursions to that fancy mall across town, she seemed absolutely mesmerized by my house. We'd stop by so I could grab my good credit card, and she walked through the rooms. With this dreamy, almost reverent expression, her fingers traced the marble countertops in the kitchen. She stood for a full minute admiring the crystal chandelier Richard had surprised me with for our 20th anniversary. And she spent way too long staring at the view from the master bedroom balcony. "Rose, this place is like something from a magazine," she sighed, settling into Richard's old leather chair in the study, like she was testing how it felt. "I bet you wake up every morning feeling like absolute royalty. The light, the space, the way everything flows together, it's perfect." "It's just a house, dear," I said, though her appreciation was flattering. "Richard and I were lucky, but it's really too big for just me now." She shook her head firmly, her eyes still scanning the room like she was memorizing every detail. "No, it's not just a house. This is a dream home. Someone could live here forever and never want to leave. Never need to leave." The way she said those last words, "never need to leave," gave me an odd chill, but I brushed it off as enthusiasm. Maybe she was just imagining her future with Elliot, thinking about the kind of home they might build together someday. That same afternoon, I made what I now realize was a crucial mistake. While we were at the department store, I left my purse with her for a few minutes. When I ducked into the restroom, she was trying on a scarf, chatting with the sales associate about how silk scarves never go out of style, and it seemed natural to ask her to watch my things. When I came back, nothing seemed out of place. My wallet was where I'd left it. My keys were still clipped to the inside pocket, and Ava was exactly where I'd left her, now trying on a pair of sunglasses that made her look like a movie star. But thinking back now, with everything I know, that was probably when it started. When she had access to my purse, my pill organizer, my whole life condensed into that one leather bag, ready to go grab lunch. She asked brightly, linking her arm through mine like we were old friends. I should have been more careful. I should have paid attention to how she seemed to know exactly where everything was in my house after just one visit. I should have wondered why someone on a teacher's salary could afford designer clothes and expensive dinners. But I was so starved for companionship, so desperate to feel needed and wanted again, that I ignored every instinct screaming at me to be cautious. What I didn't know was that my peaceful retirement was about to become a living nightmare, and the woman I was growing to love, like the daughter I never had, was already planning to destroy me from the inside out, one carefully measured dose at a time. The confusion started about a week before the cruise, and at first, I convinced myself it was just stress, maybe excitement about the trip, or the natural anxiety that comes with getting older and facing the fact that your mind might not be as sharp as it used to be. It began with small things that I tried to laugh off. I woke up in my guest bathroom one Tuesday morning, standing in front of the mirror in my nightgown, completely disoriented. For several terrifying minutes, I couldn't remember if I was at home or in some hotel room. The marble tiles under my bare feet felt foreign. The reflection staring back at me looked like a stranger, and my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Get it together, Rose," I whispered to myself, gripping the marble countertop until my knuckles went white. "You're in your own house. This is your bathroom. You've lived here for 32 years. But the confusion lingered like fog, making everything feel unreal and disconnected. Later that same day, I ran into my neighbor Janet at the grocery store. Janet, who I'd known since the Carter administration, who'd brought me casseroles after Richard's funeral and still borrowed my hedge trimmer every spring. She was standing right in front of me in the produce section, holding a bag of oranges and smiling warmly. "Rose, how are you holding up, honey?" I stared at her face, familiar, but suddenly nameless, and felt my brain scramble for information that should have been automatic. The silence stretched uncomfortably while she waited for me to respond, her smile starting to fade into concern. I'm sorry I'm having one of those days." I finally managed, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to me. "You know how it is. Are you feeling all right?" Janet's voice carried that careful tone people use when they're worried but trying not to show it. "You look a little pale, just tired," I lied. Because what else could I say? That I was losing my mind at 68, that I couldn't remember the name of someone I'd known for decades. When I told Elliot about these episodes during our next phone call, I tried to keep my voice light and casual, like they were amusing little quirks instead of terrifying glimpses into what felt like early dementia. It's probably just stress, Mom, he said. But his voice sounded distant, distracted by whatever was on his computer screen. Or maybe you need a vacation. Good thing you're coming on the cruise with us. Sea air, relaxation, no responsibilities. It'll be perfect. Before I could respond, I heard Ava's voice in the background, and then she was on the phone, her tone warm and reassuring. Rose, sweetie, don't worry about those little memory hiccups. My uncle went through something similar. When he hit his 70s, just age catching up with him, the ocean air will do you absolute wonders. Sometimes we just need to get away from our routines and let our minds reset. Her uncle? She mentioned him so casually, like it was just normal family history. But something about the way she said it bothered me in a way I couldn't articulate. What happened to your uncle? I asked, curiosity getting the better of me. There was a brief pause before she answered. Oh, he's doing much better now. He's in a lovely care facility where he gets all the help he needs. Very peaceful, very serene. He seems quite content there. The incidents kept happening with increasing frequency. I'd find myself standing in my kitchen with no memory of walking there, holding a coffee mug and wondering if I'd been planning to make tea instead. I'd start telling stories to my reflection in the bathroom mirror and forget the endings halfway through. Once I got lost driving to the bank, a route I'd taken hundreds of times over the years, suddenly as foreign as if I'd been dropped into a different city. But here's what's really twisted about the whole situation. Every time something happened, every time I had one of these frightening episodes, Ava would show up within hours. She'd arrive with homemade soup or fresh-baked cookies, settling into my kitchen like she belonged there, full of sympathy and concern. You poor thing, she'd say, stirring honey into my tea with such careful attention. These things happen to all of us eventually. The important thing is not to stress about it. Stress just makes everything worse. I thought she was taking care of me, being the devoted future daughter-in-law who genuinely cared about my well-being. Turns out she was just monitoring her handiwork, making sure the poison was working exactly as planned. The cruise ship was absolutely magnificent when we boarded in Miami. All gleaming glass elevators and polished marble floors. Like a floating palace designed to make you forget you were surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean. The lobby had a 3-story waterfall and enough fresh flowers to stock a wedding. And I felt a flutter of genuine excitement for the first time in months. Ava squealed with delight at everything, bouncing on her toes like a child at Disney World. Rose, look, at this place, it's like something from a movie. She grabbed my arm, practically vibrating with enthusiasm. We're going to have the most amazing time. I can already feel myself relaxing, but Elliot seemed oddly subdued as we went through the check-in process. While Ava chatted animatedly with the staff about dinner reservations and showtimes, he stood slightly apart, scrolling through his phone with a frown that deepened with each message. Everything all right, honey? I asked, touching his arm. Gently, he looked up, startled like he'd forgotten we were there. Oh yeah, just work stuff. The Johnson merger is hitting some snags and my partners are. He shook his head, shoving the phone into his pocket. It's fine. I'm supposed to be on vacation, right? That's right, Ava said firmly, appearing at his other side with our room keys. No work, no stress, no thinking about anything except having fun together. She handed me my key card with a bright smile. Rose, you're just down the hall from us, so we'll practically be neighbors. Our first night, we met for dinner in the main dining room, a space so elegant it made me feel underdressed despite wearing my best cocktail dress. The waiters moved like dancers. The crystal glasses caught the light like tiny prisms, and the menu featured dishes I couldn't even pronounce properly. Elia was making an effort to be present, asking me about my plans for the next day and complimenting Ava's dress, but there was something strained in his smile, a tension around his eyes that reminded me of how he'd looked as a teenager when he was hiding a bad report card. You seem tired, sweetheart, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. Are you sure you're feeling all right? Just need to adjust to being away from the office. he said, but his laugh sounded forced. It's harder than I thought it would be to completely disconnect. After dinner, we strolled around the ship's promenade deck, admiring the way the moon painted a silver path across a dark water. Ava linked arms with both of us, chattering about all the activities she wanted to try. The rock climbing wall, the cooking classes, the dance lessons. This is perfect. She sighed contentedly. Just the three of us. No distractions, no interruptions. We can really get to know each other. But as we headed back to our cabins, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way Elliot kept checking his phone, even though we were in the middle of the ocean with spotty service. Maybe it was how Ava seemed almost too enthusiastic, like she was performing happiness rather than feeling it. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard voices from their cabin next door. The walls were thinner than I'd expected, and their conversation carried clearly through the ventilation system. His voice was low but agitated. I never discussed this timeline with you, Ava. This wasn't part of the plan. Her voice higher and more insistent. Plans change, Elliot. We don't have a choice now. The opportunity is right here. This is going too far. I'm not comfortable with, since when do you get uncomfortable about anything that benefits us both? Their voices dropped to whispers after that, but the tension was unmistakable. I pressed my ear to the wall, heart pounding, trying to make out more words. But all I could hear were urgent murmurs and what sounded like papers shuffling. The next morning, they were all smiles again, acting like the perfect couple, planning their perfect future together. Ava brought me coffee in bed. I thought you might like to start the day slowly, she said sweetly. And Elliot seemed more relaxed, asking about my plans for the day and suggesting we all meet for lunch. But I couldn't forget what I'd heard. Couldn't stop wondering what plan they'd been discussing and why Elliot had seemed so resistant to some kind of timeline. Little did I know, I was about to discover just how wrong my instincts really were and how much danger I was actually in. By the third day, my confusion episodes were getting noticeably worse, and I was starting to genuinely panic about what was happening to my mind. The incidents weren't just occasional lapses anymore. They were frequent, frightening, and completely unpredictable. I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning on the ship's deck, standing in my pajamas at the railing with no memory of leaving my cabin. The ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, black and mysterious under the star-filled sky. And for several terrifying minutes, I couldn't remember my own name, let alone how I'd gotten there. A security guard found me 20 minutes later, still standing there in my nightgown and slippers, shivering in the cool night air. Ma'am, are you all right? His voice was gentle but concerned. The kind of tone people use with confused elderly people they're afraid might do something dangerous. I'm fine, I said automatically, though nothing about the situation was fine. Just getting some air. It's pretty cold out here for just pajamas, he said diplomatically. Can I escort you back to your cabin? The walk back was mortifying. Other passengers we passed in the hallways stared at me with that mixture of pity and discomfort people show when they witness someone else's dignity crumbling in real time. I kept my head high, but inside I was crumbling. At breakfast the next morning, Ava was extra attentive, hovering around me like a concerned nurse monitoring a patient. You look exhausted, Rose, she said, her voice full of sympathy as she slid into the seat across from me. Did you sleep badly? Sometimes the motion of the ship can be disorienting. I'm fine, I repeated, but my hands were shaking as I reached for my coffee cup. Here, I brought you some fresh orange juice, she said, placing a tall glass in front of me with a bright, encouraging smile. Fresh squeezed from the buffet. And don't forget your morning medications. It's so important to stay on schedule, especially when our routines are disrupted. She was right, of course. I'd been taking the same medications for years. Blood pressure pills, calcium supplements, a mild antidepressant my doctor had prescribed after Richard died. But lately they looked slightly different than I remembered. The shapes were subtly wrong. The colors not quite what I expected. When I mentioned this to the ship's doctor during what Ava had insisted was a routine wellness check, he nodded dismissively. Generic brands often vary in appearance. Mrs. Bennett, pharmaceutical companies change their manufacturing processes, use different dyes, different coatings. As long as you're getting them from the same pharmacy, there's nothing to worry about. It made sense at the time. Why would I doubt a medical professional? Ava also started carrying my purse during our daily excursions around the ship, claiming she wanted to help since I seemed a bit scattered lately. So thoughtful of her, so considerate. She'd take charge of my room key, my credit cards, even my lip balm, organizing everything in that efficient way that made me feel taken care of instead of diminished. You just focus on enjoying yourself, she'd say warmly. Let me handle the details. That afternoon, while she and Elliot were at the spa getting couples massages, I decided to rest in my cabin. But as I lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the distant sounds of laughter from the pool deck, fragments of their whispered conversation kept replaying in my mind. The timeline they'd discussed, the plan that was apparently benefiting both of them, the way Elliot had seemed so resistant to whatever Ava was pushing for. And then there was her comment about her uncle, how casually she'd mentioned his memory issues and how content he seemed in his care facility. Something about that whole story felt rehearsed, like she'd told it many times before to many different people. I tried to push the thoughts away, tried to convince myself I was being paranoid and suspicious because my own mental clarity was deteriorating. But the doubts kept creeping back in, persistent as water finding cracks in a dam. Something was happening to me, something beyond normal aging, and I was starting to suspect it wasn't entirely natural. But what I discovered next changed everything. I thought I knew about the people I trusted most. It was formal night on the ship, and the main dining room had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in pristine white linens, and the live orchestra played soft jazz that made conversation feel more intimate and meaningful. Ava looked absolutely stunning in a gold sequin dress that clung to her figure like liquid metal and caught the light every time she moved. The dress probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. And I found myself wondering again how someone on a teacher's salary could afford such expensive clothes. But then again, maybe Elliot had bought it for her. He'd always been generous with the people he cared about. You look beautiful tonight, dear, I told her as we were seated at our usual table near the dance floor. Thank you, Rose. You look pretty elegant yourself in that navy dress. She reached across and squeezed my hand affectionately. I'm so glad we're all here together. This has been such a perfect trip. Elliot seemed more relaxed than he'd been all week, actually laughing at Ava's stories about her most challenging students and asking me about my plans for redecorating the guest bedroom. When we got home, for the first time since we'd boarded, he seemed present and engaged instead of distracted by invisible worries. When the live band started playing Moon River, one of Richard's favorite songs, Ava's eyes lit up with delight. Oh, I love this song. Elliot danced with me. She stood and extended her hand with a playful smile. I'm not much of a dancer, he protested, but he was already pushing back his chair. That's what makes it fun. She laughed, pulling him toward the polished dance floor where other couples were already swaying to the music. I smiled, watching them move together under the soft lights. Elliot was right, he wasn't much of a dancer, but Ava made up for his awkwardness with natural grace, guiding him through simple steps that made them look like they belonged together. Maybe I'd been overthinking everything. Maybe they'd just been stressed about wedding planning and work pressures, and I'd misinterpreted normal couple tensions as something sinister. That's when the waitress appeared beside my table. She was young, maybe 25, with concerned brown eyes and the kind of serious expression that immediately put me on alert. She opened a leather-bound menu in front of me with deliberate precision and said, just loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "Here's the special dessert menu you requested." Ma'am, I hadn't requested any menu, special or otherwise. Confused, I looked down at the open page, expecting to see photographs of elaborate cakes and chocolate confections. Instead, there was a folded cocktail napkin tucked between the pages, and my name was written on it in hasty blue ink. My hand trembled as I unfolded the napkin under the cover of the menu. I saw her put something in your drink when she got up to dance. Small white powder from a tiny bottle in her purse. Don't react. Switch glasses when she comes back. Get help immediately. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. I looked up at the waitress, who was still standing beside my table with professional composure. But her eyes were intense and worried. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the music. She gave me the slightest nod and walked away, leaving me alone with the most terrifying revelation of my life. I looked toward the dance floor where Ava was spinning gracefully in Elliot's arms, her sequin dress catching the light like stars, her laughter carrying over the music. She looked so beautiful, so happy, so perfectly innocent. Then I looked at our table. 2 glasses of red wine sat side by side, mine half empty, hers barely touched. They looked identical, elegant crystal glasses filled with the same deep burgundy liquid. Without allowing myself to think about it, without hesitating long enough to talk myself out of it, I switched them. When they returned to the table 5 minutes later, both slightly breathless and smiling, Ava was glowing with happiness. That was wonderful. I haven't danced like that in years. She settled into her chair and immediately reached for her wine glass. My wine glass, raising it in a toast. To family and to the most perfect vacation I could have imagined. To family, Elliot echoed, raising his own glass. I lifted mine with a steady hand, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a caged bird trying to escape. To family indeed, I said, and watched her take a long, satisfied sip of wine that I now knew contained something that was supposed to destroy me. 20 minutes later, I was watching my future daughter-in-law slowly poison herself with her own weapon, and the satisfaction was almost overwhelming. It started subtly. Ava began blinking more frequently, like she was having trouble focusing on our conversation. She touched her forehead delicately and made a small comment about the dining room feeling warm, though the air conditioning was perfectly comfortable. "Are you feeling all right, sweetheart?" Elliot asked, noticing her slightly glazed expression. "I'm fine," she said, but her words came out just a fraction slower than normal. "Just, the wine is stronger than I expected." She'd barely had half a glass, but I wasn't about to point that out. 10 minutes later, she started slurring her words just slightly at first, then more noticeably. "The lights are so sparkly tonight," she giggled, staring up at the crystal chandelier with unfocused eyes, like little diamonds dancing in the air. "Have you ever noticed how diamonds dance, Rose?" Elliot frowned, setting down his dessert fork. "Ava, are you sure you're okay? You've hardly had anything to drink." She tried to stand and swayed dangerously, catching herself on the back of her chair. "I feel floaty, like I'm on a cloud. Everything's moving, but in a good way." "Maybe you should sit down," I suggested, working hard to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. The motion of the ship can be disorienting sometimes. She looked at me with pupils that were dilated and unfocused, her beautiful face slack with confusion. "Rosé, did you know the ocean has secrets? So many secrets swimming around down there in the dark." Other diners were starting to stare now, whispering behind their hands and pointing discreetly at our table. A young woman in a designer gown was acting completely intoxicated at an elegant dinner, and it was exactly the kind of scene that made people uncomfortable. "I have secrets too," Ava continued, her voice getting louder and more erratic. "Big secrets, important secrets, but they're safe with me because I'm very good at keeping things safe." Elliot was genuinely worried now, his face flushed with embarrassment and concern. "Okay, that's enough. Come on, Ava, let's get you back to the room so you can lie down." "But I don't want to lie down," she protested, her words slurring together. "I want to tell Rose about the secrets. She should know about the secrets because they're her secrets to sort of..." My heart stopped for a moment, even drugged and incoherent. Was she about to confess what she'd been doing to me? "You're not making sense," Elliot said firmly, standing and moving to help her up. "Let's go." As he guided her toward the elevator, she kept talking, rambling nonsense about floating castles and golden fish, and how beautiful it would be to live in a palace by the sea forever and ever. The same kind of confused, disconnected speech I'd been experiencing for weeks, the same frightening loss of mental clarity that had made me. The ship's security chief, a serious man in his 50s with kind eyes and a non-nonsense attitude, pulled up the recordings from our dinner table on a bank of monitors in his office. The cameras had captured everything in crystal clear detail from multiple angles with timestamps that would make the evidence indisputable in court. There, the waitress said, pointing at the screen. Right there, we watched Ava excuse herself from the table, claiming she needed to powder her nose. The camera followed her movements as she stopped at the bar instead of heading toward the restrooms. She ordered 2 glasses of wine, the same vintage we'd been drinking all week, and waited while the bartender poured them with professional precision. Then, when the bartender turned away to serve another customer, she glanced around quickly to make sure no one was watching, reached into her small evening purse, and pulled out what looked like a tiny glass vial. "Can you zoom in on that?" The security chief asked his technician. The image enlarged, and we could see her fingers working with practiced efficiency, unscrewing a miniature cap and tapping white powder into one of the wine glasses. She stirred it quickly with a cocktail straw, disposed of the vial in her purse, and carried both glasses back to our table with a bright smile. "The one on the left was yours," the waitress confirmed. She made sure to place it on your side of the table. My stomach churned as I watched myself on the screen, completely unaware that I was about to consume poison. I looked so trusting, so grateful for her thoughtfulness in bringing me a fresh glass of wine. "How long has this been happening?" the security chief asked, his voice grim with professional concern. "I think months," I said, the words feeling strange and surreal as I spoke. I've been having episodes, confusion, memory loss, disorientation. I thought it was age-related, maybe early dementia. But now we need to document everything, he said firmly. This is attempted poisoning, possibly attempted murder, depending on what substances she's been using. I'm going to contact the authorities immediately. As we watched the footage again, I felt a rage building inside me that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This woman, this person I'd grown to love like the daughter I never had been systematically destroying my mind for her own twisted purposes. But underneath the anger was something even worse. Doubt about Elliot. "I need to know if my son is involved in this," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. The security chief's expression was sympathetic but professional. "We'll investigate everyone who had access to you, ma'am. No exceptions. But right now, we need to secure the suspect and preserve the evidence." He made several phone calls in rapid succession to the ship's medical officer, to the captain, to what sounded like law enforcement contacts at our next port of call. Within 30 minutes, there was a plan in motion. "We're going to search their cabin," he explained. "If she's been drugging you systematically, there will be evidence. More vials, possibly your medication bottles with substituted pills, maybe even documentation of her activities." The thought of Elliot's reaction terrified me almost as much as the discovery itself. How do you tell your son that his fiancée is a would-be murderer? How do you look him in the eye and explain that the woman he loves has been slowly poisoning his mother? But I had to know the truth, even if it destroyed our relationship forever. At 11 o'clock that night, they knocked on Elliot's cabin door. I stood in the hallway behind the security team, watching my son's face transform from confusion to horror as they explained why they were there. He was wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hair disheveled from sleep. And he looked so young and vulnerable that my heart ached for him. "Mom?" He looked at me desperately, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "What's going on? What are they talking about?" I couldn't speak. I just stared at him, trying to read his face, trying to figure out if the son I'd raised was capable of plotting my destruction, or if he was as much a victim as I was. The answer would determine whether I still had any family left in the world. The search of their cabin was thorough, methodical, and absolutely devastating. Ava was still groggy from the drug she'd accidentally consumed, lying on the bed in a silk nightgown and mumbling incoherently while Elliot sat beside her, holding her hand and asking repeatedly what was happening. She was alert enough to understand that security officers were going through their belongings, but too disoriented to mount any kind of coherent defense. "This is insane," Elliot kept saying, his voice getting higher and more strained with each repetition. "There has to be some kind of mistake. Ava would never hurt anyone, especially not my mother." but the evidence spoke louder than his protests. In her suitcase, hidden in a zipper compartment underneath her carefully folded lingerie, they found 3 small glass vials of clear liquid, each no bigger than a perfume sample. The labels had been removed, but you could see the residue where pharmaceutical stickers had been peeled away. "What are these?" the security chief asked, holding up the vials with latex gloves. Ava tried to focus on what he was showing her, blinking slowly like she was having trouble processing visual information. I don't know what those are. Then why are they hidden in your luggage?" She couldn't answer or wouldn't answer. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air, but no words came out. They also found a prescription bottle that looked exactly like my blood pressure. Medication, same pharmacy label, same drug name, same dosage instructions. But when they opened it, the pills inside were different from what I'd been taking for years. "She's been switching your real medication with these," the security chief explained, showing me the counterfeit pills. "We'll need to have them analyzed by a lab, but I suspect they're designed to cause the cognitive symptoms you've been experiencing." Elliot was staring at the evidence in complete shock, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror. "Ava, what is this? What have you done?" She looked at him with unfocused eyes, her beautiful face slack and vulnerable in a way that would have been heartbreaking if I didn't know what she was capable of. "It's not what it looks like," she slurred, her words coming out thick and imprecise. "Then what is it?" he demanded, his voice cracking with emotion. She couldn't answer because there was no innocent explanation for having vials of unknown drugs and counterfeit medications hidden in her luggage. But the most damning evidence was still to come. They found her tablet computer, and when they accessed the photo gallery, there were dozens of video files I'd never known existed. Videos of me during my confused episodes, clearly recorded without my knowledge or consent. The security chief played them on the small screen while we all watched in horrified silence. There I was, stumbling through my own kitchen, looking lost and disoriented. There I was, forgetting words mid-sentence during what looked like a phone conversation. There I was, appearing intoxicated and confused during what I now recognized as one of our shopping trips. "Evidence," the security chief said quietly. "She was building a to prove you were mentally incompetent." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Ava hadn't been drugging me randomly or maliciously. She'd been systematically creating a documented pattern of cognitive decline, preparing to have me declared legally incompetent so she could what? Take control of my finances, have me committed to a care facility. The ship's medical officer examined my prescription bottles that I'd brought from home. Sure enough, my medications had been tampered with. Pills that should have been controlling my blood pressure had been replaced with substances designed to cause confusion, disorientation, and memory loss. "How long has this been going on?" the medical officer asked. "Months," I said, my voice hollow with shock. "Maybe since we first met." As they prepared to transfer Ava to the ship's holding facility until we reached port, I finally asked Elliot the question that had been eating at me since this nightmare began. "Did you know?" He looked at me with tears streaming down his face, his expression broken and devastated. "Mom, I swear to you, on Dad's grave. I had no idea. I thought, God help me. I thought you were just getting older." I thought the confusion was natural, and I was grateful that Ava was taking such good care of you. I wanted to believe him. Every instinct I had as a mother wanted to trust that my son was innocent, that he'd been manipulated as cry as I had. But trust once shattered is harder to rebuild than love. "The way you've been acting," I said carefully. "The arguments I heard, the distance, the stress. I've been worried about you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And Ava kept suggesting that maybe you needed professional evaluation. Maybe you weren't safe living alone anymore. I thought she was being caring and responsible, looking out for your best interests." The manipulation had been perfect. I realized she'd made him complicit without his knowledge, turned his genuine concern for my well-being into a weapon against me. But I still wasn't entirely convinced he was as innocent as he claimed. The next morning, we docked in Miami. and real police officers boarded the ship with the kind of efficiency that suggested they'd dealt with shipboard crimes before. They took Ava into custody, and she was alert enough by then to understand that her life, as she'd known it, was over. Detective Maria Santos, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with graying hair and a non-nonsense attitude, interviewed me in the ship's conference room while technicians photographed evidence and took statements from witnesses. We ran Ms. Mitchell's fingerprints through our database as soon as the ship's security contacted us, she said, consulting a thick file folder. What we found is disturbing. She spread photographs across the table. Mugshots, driver's license, photos, what looked like surveillance images from security cameras. Ava Mitchell isn't her real name. She's actually Ava Richardson, and she has a criminal record going back 7 years. Fraud, identity theft, elder abuse. She's made a career out of targeting wealthy older people. My stomach dropped. There have been others, at least 3 that we know of. Most recently, she was married to a man named Robert Hughes, 62 years old, successful contractor from Tampa. He died 8 months ago under what his family considered suspicious circumstances, apparent heart attack during what appeared to be a bout of food poisoning. Elliot went pale. She told me she'd never been married before. She inherited a significant portion of his estate, about $400,000 plus his house. His children contested the will, claiming their father had been acting strangely in the months before his death, showing signs of cognitive decline that didn't match his medical history. The pattern was becoming horrifyingly clear. There's more, Detective Santos continued. She had a wealthy uncle, Edward Richardson, who was committed to a psychiatric facility 3 years ago after exhibiting sudden signs of dementia and severe confusion. Ava was his primary caregiver before the commitment, and she now has full power of attorney over his finances. I felt sick. Is he still alive? Very much so. And according to his doctors, his dementia has improved dramatically since he was moved to a different facility and his medications were changed. They're now questioning his original diagnosis. So, she's done this before? I said, though it wasn't really a question. We believe she's been perfecting this technique for years. She targets wealthy individuals, usually older people with adult children who live far away. She gains their trust, slowly poisons them to create symptoms of cognitive decline, then either inherits their assets when they die or gains control of their finances when they're declared incompetent. Elliot was shaking, his hands clenched into fists on the table. If she could do this to you, what was she planning for me? Detective Santos gave him a sympathetic look. Based on her established pattern, I'd say you would have been next after. Your mother was successfully committed or eliminated. A tragic accident, maybe. Carbon monoxide poisoning, allergic reaction to medication, car crash. Something that would leave her as your widow and sole heir to both your assets and your mother's estate. The scope of her plan was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. She would have destroyed my mind, stolen my life, murdered my son, and walked away with everything we'd worked for. Probably to start the process over again with the next wealthy family. We're reopening the investigation into Robert Hughes' death, Detective Santos said. And we'll be reviewing Edward Richardson's case as well. If you'd switched those glasses, Mrs. Bennett, you might have saved not just your own life, but prevented future murders. What happens now? I asked. Ava Richardson will be charged with attempted murder, fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. Given the evidence and her criminal history, she's looking at 25 to life in prison. Her uncle will be moved to appropriate care, and his finances will be investigated, and you'll need extensive medical evaluation to determine what substances she was giving you and what the long-term effects might be. As they led her off the ship in handcuffs, Ava looked back at me one last time. Her beautiful face was composed now, no longer confused or disoriented. And I saw her clearly for what she really was. A predator who had chosen the wrong prey. I really did care about you, Rose, she called out, her voice carrying that same sweet tone she'd used when bringing me soup and sympathy. You have to believe that. But I didn't believe it. Because someone who cares about you doesn't systematically destroy your mind for profit. Someone who cares about you doesn't turn your own son into an unwitting accomplice in your destruction. Someone who cares about you doesn't plan your murder while holding your hand and calling you family. The medical tests at the hospital in Miami were extensive and horrifying. The substance Ava had been giving me was a sophisticated cocktail of drugs designed to cause cognitive impairment, confusion, and memory loss without showing up in standard blood tests. It was the kind of thing that required pharmaceutical knowledge and careful dosing. Too little and the effects would be minimal. Too much and the victim might die before the plan could be completed. You're extremely lucky you caught this when you did. Dr. Patricia Williams, the toxicologist, explained as she reviewed my test results. This particular combination of substances can cause permanent brain damage with long-term exposure. A few more months of systematic poisoning and the cognitive effects might have been irreversible. The drugs were cumulative, building up in my system over time, which explained why my symptoms had gotten progressively worse. Each dose had added to the previous one, creating an increasingly severe impairment that would have eventually left me completely dependent on a caregiver, namely Ava. Elliot stayed with me throughout the entire medical ordeal, holding my hand during the procedures, bringing me books and magazines to pass the time, and most importantly, listening when I needed to talk through everything that had happened. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past week, his face drawn with guilt and exhaustion. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," he said one afternoon as we sat in my hospital room, watching the Miami skyline through the window. "The way she always wanted to know about your finances. How she insisted on coming to your doctor's appointments. How she seemed to know more about your medical history than I did. You couldn't have known," I told him, though part of me was still working through my own feelings about his role in everything. "She was good at what she did, professional, but I should have seen it. I should have protected you." His voice cracked with emotion. "She even suggested we get you evaluated for dementia last month. Said it would be better to catch it early, get you the help you needed." I thought she was being caring and responsible. The police investigation revealed the full scope of Ava's crimes and the intricate planning that had gone into targeting our family. She had researched us for months before the accidental meeting she'd orchestrated with Elliot. She knew about my wealth, my isolation after Richard's death, and my desperate desire to be closer to my son. She'd studied my routines, learned my vulnerabilities, and crafted a persona specifically designed to appeal to what I needed most. A caring daughter figure who would help bridge the gap between Elliot and me. "The plan was to have you declared incompetent and committed to a care facility," Detective Santos explained during one of her follow-up visits. "She would have moved into your house as Elliot's wife, gradually isolated him from friends and colleagues. And then something would have happened to him, too. A car accident maybe, or a sudden illness. Something that would leave her as the sole beneficiary of both estates. A year-long plan to systematically destroy my family and steal everything we'd worked for. But she'd underestimated one crucial factor, a caring waitress with good instincts and the courage to get involved. Ava Richardson was sentenced to 25 years in prison for attempted murder, fraud, elder abuse, and a dozen other charges. Her uncle Edward was moved to a reputable facility and was slowly recovering with proper medication and care. The investigation into her previous husband's death was reopened, and authorities were confident they would find enough evidence to file additional charges. Elliot moved back home during my recovery and simply never left. He set up a home office in Richard's old study, cut back his work hours dramatically, and we started having dinner together every night like we had when he was young. "I almost lost you," he told me one evening as we sat on the back patio watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "I'm not taking that risk again. Business will survive without me micromanaging every detail. But I can't survive losing you." Our relationship had never been closer. Then the trauma had stripped away years of polite distance and forced us to confront how much we actually meant to each other. We talked about Richard, about missed opportunities, about the future we wanted to build together. I was back to my old self within a few months. Sharp, independent, and maybe a little more cautious about who I trusted. But I wasn't bitter or paranoid. Life's too precious to waste on negative emotions. And I'd learned that I was stronger and more resilient than I'd ever imagined. Every morning, I woke up in my beautiful house and felt genuinely grateful, not just for the luxury and comfort, but for the clarity of mind to appreciate them, for my son's presence and love, for the second chance I'd almost lost to a predator's greed. The woman who tried to steal my life had ended up giving me something precious instead. The knowledge that I could survive anything, and that sometimes the people trying to destroy you end up destroying themselves. Ava had wanted to live in my house forever, surrounded by all the beautiful things Richard and I had collected over the years. Now she's got a permanent address, too. Just not the one she was planning on. Her new home has bars on the windows and locks on the doors. And she'd be there for the next quarter century, thinking about how a simple switched glass changed everything. What did you think of this story? Have you ever had someone in your life who seemed too good to be true, who paid just a little too much attention to your personal business? Share your thoughts in the comments below because I'd love to hear about your experiences with people who weren't quite what they seemed. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Secret Affairs Exposed for more powerful real-life stories like this one.